Hello, everyone. My name is Kaytlyn,
And I'm Liberty.
and today we're going to be discussing Marxist and socialist feminism in criminology. So, this week's prompt was to explain both Marxist and socialist feminism, how they're different, and how those differences impact their respective theories of crime. So, a brief introduction to feminist criminology is that it examines how gender inequality affects women's experiences with crime and the criminal justice system. It aims to create gender responsive justice solutions. As we know, gender is a complex social product and it is constructed by interpretations of masculinity and femininity. So, a little background and some history on feminist criminology is that it emerged in the 1960s and 1970s during the second wave of the feminist movement. It aims to critique the male dominated criminal justice system for ignoring women's experiences, as oftentimes women perspectives and women in general were left out of a lot of policy making when it came to crime and the criminal justice system. Feminist criminology also seeks to understand how gender intersects with race, class, and sexuality to shape criminal behavior and justice responses.
It can be seen also that it challenges traditional theories and aims to create a more just system.
So, just going back to the intersectionality that we talked about on the previous slide, intersectionality recognizes the complex and interconnected nature of social identities and experiences, and its integration into feminist criminology is very important for understanding the unique experiences and vulnerabilities of marginalized groups, such as women in the criminal justice system.
For our Marxist feminism theory, what is it? Marxist feminism focuses on the economy and capitalism. Societies with less social class inequality have been seen to also have less gender inequality, and the Marxist theory prioritizes class over patriarchy. It sees society as patriarchal, but it argues that this patriarchy is rooted in the kind of economy a society has, in particular in its class relations of production. This type of feminism is based on the understandings of Marxism proposed by Karl Marx in the 19th century. Karl Marx saw capitalism as a progressive historical stage that would eventually stagnate due to internal contradictions and be followed by socialism. Marxist feminism and its relation to crime argues it is due to the double oppression of women that leads both to their victimization and to their criminality. Marxist feminists see male crime against women not as the result of inherent qualities of male nature, but as a product of men's molding to exploitative relations by a capitalist system. The relative lack of women's criminality and the nature of women's crimes are also explained from the Marxist feminism perspective. Men's control over economic exploitation explains why women, like slaves, commit very few crimes. Moreover, the crimes women do commit are reflections of their class-defined dependency or attempts to break from it. As with most Marxist analysis, since these problems are rooted in the capitalist system of production, the policy implication is that capitalism must be replaced by socialism, which does not exploit its workers or allow the economic exploitation of women by men. Some major criticisms of the Marxist feminists come from socialist feminists who disagree with the priority given to class over patriarchy. In particular, Marxist feminism has been criticized for explaining women's domestic labor in relation to capital, but not to relationships to men.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about socialist feminism. So socialist feminism is an attempt to merge Marxist feminism and radical feminism. It examines the interrelated and interdependent forces of capitalism and patriarchy that lead to men's crime and women's oppression, subordination, and dependency. And it does this without prioritizing one over the other. So, the relatively powerful position of men results in them having greater opportunities for crime and a greater ability to create harm. This is from the perspective of socialist feminism. In contrast, socialist feminists say that women's relatively subordinate position affords them less opportunity to offend, just as it affords them less opportunity to benefit from legitimate opportunities. class patriarchy not only creates crime but subordinates women. Where other versions of feminism see women's subordination resulting from one or another determining force, socialist feminism sees humans as shaped and transformed by cooperative, productive activity. And while this part is not on the slide, a very popular theory from socialist feminism is Hagen's power control theory. So, John Hagen and his colleagues illustrate a version of socialist feminism in their power control theory, in which they combine patriarchy and class in relation to gender role socialization. And here we're seeing that intersectionality that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. And what Hagen and his colleagues are doing is they're suggesting that class relationships in the workplace and gender relations in society come together, they intersect in the domestic context of the family, producing two basic types of families with different consequences for female crime. Where the husband or father works in a powerful authority position and the wife or the mother stays at home. This patriarchal family reproduces a sexual division of labor in their children, with daughters becoming homemakers and sons becoming active in the labor force. So, this is taking us back to the earlier ideas of the nuclear family, where you have the father who is fulfilling that masculine role of being the breadwinner, and then you have the mother who is fulfilling the quote unquote feminine role of taking care of the children and doing more feminine activities such as staying at home, cooking, cleaning, etc. So this is because in a lot of families, girls are subject to instrumental control and supervision in the belief that they need greater protection from their vulnerability to crime and victimization. What Hagen argues is that girls in patriarchal families are forced to either endure or escape their domestic oppression and will look for a deviant role, such as suicide or running away, resulting in their designation as deviant or delinquent. However, boys in patriarchal families are given greater freedom to take risks and are socialized to control others, and as a result, are relatively free to deviate. In contrast, where both parents work and share domestic chores, this is an egalitarian family which produces daughters and sons equally prepared to work. These daughters of egalitarian families, unlike those in patriarchal families, are socialized to be greater risk takers and are just as likely to be involved in crime as their sons. In addition, he presents this idea of his four families. So when gender and class power dimensions are combined, four types of families result according to Hagen, each with different probabilities that their children will be involved in crime. So higher class power egalitarian families, such as the dual career professional families, are likely to show the least difference between delinquency among their sons and daughters, as we just discussed. So dual career working class egalitarian families show a higher difference but lower than the difference in delinquency between sons and daughters of higher class patriarchal families, since patriarchy is more differentiating than class power. Each of these families can be expected to show a lower difference than traditional working class patriarchal families, since they experience the combined negative effects of both class and gender. Also important is that Hagen argues that the greater access to power and resources renders those in highest economic positions the most liberated to commit white collar and corporate crime using either the corporation or their occupational resources, and they are most able to afford the means to separate and protect themselves from prosecution. As a result of critical evaluations that Hagen's power control theory has received over the past few years, there have been some significant developments and modifications. One of the most interesting is that John Hagen and his colleagues' analysis of the influence of mothers on their sons. Their study confirmed that in a patriarchal family, males supported gendered activity concerning appropriate and inappropriate behaviors, which includes their freedom to offend, but they also found that mothers in less patriarchal families have affected their sons' patriarchal views, suggesting that sons in these families are less likely to offend. And again, although this is not a part of our prompt for this week, I highly recommend doing a little bit more research on Hagen and his power control theory, as it will definitely contribute to your understanding of socialist feminism in criminology. So, with all theories, there are some policy implications associated with socialist feminism. So, The policies advocated by socialist feminism are based on the idea that if productive activity creates differences, then the power of sharing can also be used to reduce the differences between men and women. Socialist feminism Feminists see the solution to women's subordination as replacing capitalism with a collective political and legal order based on equality between class and gender. They want to expose and eliminate male dominated power hierarchies in the wage based capitalist system and foster male attitudes and behaviors. In short, they want to abolish both class and gender. Socialist feminists believe that of central importance in any new order is reproductive freedom and sexual freedom. They also believe that there should be an end to compulsory motherhood. They believe in the availability of paid maternity leave and of publicly funded, community controlled childcare. These policies are designed to liberate women from alienated motherhood and allow them the freedom to be economically independent of men. But the socialist feminist collective order requires more than the absence of hierarchy. So, what I'm describing here is what many typically know as traditional feminism. So, when you hear feminism, and a lot of people's description is going to be that of the socialist feminist perspective.
Now we are going to discuss some general differences between Marxist feminism and socialist feminism. As it relates to human nature, Marxist feminists view men and women as creatively different but oppressed and exploited for class interests. This creates artificial divisions and insinuates competitive male characteristics. In comparison, social feminism presents this idea of gendered identities. Gender, like race and ethnicity, comprises socially constructed categories imposed on biology that create women as secondary, which is a view reinforced by socialization. Another difference is the view on social order. In Marxist feminism, class hierarchy is based on inequalities of wealth, in which women are dependent and reproductive of male labor. This is different from socialist feminism, where class based patriarchy with cold scaling inequalities of class, gender, and race. It is also important to understand the difference in causal explanations between the two. Marxist feminism believes that class exploitation and subordination of women leave them dependent, weak, and vulnerable. In socialist feminism, the interaction of forces of class and gender subordinates women, creating them as a category of otherness. That is part of a general social construct of difference. Masculinity is used by some to dominate others through patriarchy.
So now I'm going to address our another aspect of our prompt, which was asking us how the differences impact their respective theories of crime. So as it relates to just in general law, crime, and criminals, in Marxist feminism, they believe that law reflects capitalist interests and works to maintain dominant class interests, which are essentially male interests. Whereas in socialist feminism, socialist feminists believe that law bolsters male supremacy and reinforces appearance of women's inferiority as natural, but it also affords women some protection. Socialist feminists also say that crime is men's domination and control over women who are devalued, and doing crime is doing masculinity. Criminals manifest the gendered identity of masculinity. As it relates to criminal justice policy, Marxist feminists believe that class exploitation and subordination of women leave them dependent, weak, and vulnerable. Whereas in socialist feminism, the interaction of forces of class and gender subordinates women, creating them as categories of otherness. And that is a part of a general social construction of difference. Masculinity is used by some to dominate others through patriarchy. And lastly, an important part of this perspective as it relates to criminal justice policy is that feminist empiricism accepts traditional models of casualty. As it relates to criminal justice practice, quickly, both Marxist and socialist feminism decentralize democratic institutions of justice and replace rational male principles with women's principles of caring, connection, and community. And that's one of the many similarities between Marxist and socialist feminism because as you could tell throughout the presentation there is a lot of overlap in between the two, but there are very distinct differences. And there are some similarities as well. So, just to conclude with our presentation, feminist criminology emphasizes the importance of gender equality in the criminal justice system, and the use of gender equality scales can help to address gender biases. And to reiterate, the Marxist feminist perspective sees society as patriarchal, but it argues that this patriarchy is rooted in the kind of economy and society it has, in particular in its class relations of production. Whereas socialist feminism examines the interrelated and interdependent forces of capitalism and patriarchy that lead to men's crime and women's oppression, subordination, and dependency.
And lastly, this is our resource, and thank you for listening.